Hello and welcome to the Echoes of Memory podcast. I'm Petro, and today we will explore a powerful and quite often overlooked chapter of the Roma history, the many forms of resistance during the Holocaust. For too long, public memory framed Roma only as a victims, faceless, passive, anonymous, but the historical record tells us different story. Roma resisted with weapons, with escapes, with the different acts of rescue, with the culture. Together with my guests, Daniela, Dezső, Michel and Brian, we will discuss what resistance meant in the past, why it's matter today, and how it shapes the future of the Roma identity. Thank you all for being here. And before we begin, I would like to ask you to introduce briefly yourself. Who is going to volunteer? You just passing it to Daniela.
Well, I guess ladies first. First, hi to everyone. My name is Daniela Samiri, and I'm originally from Bulgaria. I'm criminologist and a writer. For the past few years, I live, study, and work in the UK, currently in London. And yeah, that's all I can say about myself.
All right, thank you, Daniela. Dezső, would you go next?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much to having me. So my name is Dezső Mate. Originally, I'm from Hungary, and currently I'm living here in Germany. And my background is interdisciplinary sociology. And basically, I'm working now as a research associate at University of Heidelberg. And also I'm a visitor, lecturer, and a researcher at the University of Heidelberg at the Research Center of Anti-Gypsyism.
Hello, my name is Michel. I am originally from Hungary, and I live in Norway. I work in Romano Care as Roma guide, and I go out to school and teach about Roma history.
Brian, you're the last one.
So thank you for the invite. First and foremost, my name is Brian Mihalicek. I come from Prague, Czech Republic. As my work, I'm a professional dancer and host. I'm taking care of the dancers community in Czech Republic. And as my studies, I study French philology at the Faculty of Liberal Arts at the Charles University.
Wow.
Yes.
Thanks again to everyone for being here today. And let's start with the big picture. For decades, the Roma Holocaust has been told almost entirely through the lens of victimhood. Resistance was rarely mentioned. So what impact does this victim-only narrative have on Roma community and on public understanding of our history?
For me as a Roma, and also generally for Roma people, resistance is not a separate from the way we understand life. Our folklore is our philosophy. What I mean by this is the unwritten moral code that has carried us through centuries of persecution. And yes, we were dehumanized, but we were never without a resistance. And we have to be honest that some of our own Roma NGOs still promote the victim-only narrative, intentionally or not, because it fits a familiar advocacy model. The advocacy model that has been promoted and worked for the past maybe 30 years. And that approach might bring sympathy, but it also keeps us in the frame of powerless, limiting how the world and how our own youth also see the Roma identity. And I think true advocacy must balance the truth about persecution with the truth about agency, because we do have agency through our whole existence and surviving. We do have an agency. Otherwise, we risk still building campaigns that keep us trapped in the very story we need to move beyond.
How do you think, who created this narrative?
Hmm.
Was it created by non-Roma people? Because as the fact that we know, most of the Roma history were told by non-Roma people.
I would reflect on it in few sentences. So basically, when I finished my PhD, I thought that I wrote a thesis about Romani people, about Romani memories, about Romani histories. And at the very end, I recognized that I did not. I wrote a thesis about Gajo perceptions on the gypsies. And I'm using as a slur now gypsy. So I'm not using as a self-identification of me or for myself. Or for ourselves, it's more as a social construct I'm using usually. So just to back to the point, I'm very provocative in this sense, and I'm clearly telling that we don't know nothing about our memories and our past until late 2000s, because in the late 2000s, the third generational Roman intellectuals, let's say, our generation, they start to do this reparatory work of Romani agencies and reclaiming Romani memories. And that's why I'm telling, like, we don't know nothing about past and about our histories, because all of our memories was built by non-Romani perspective lenses and academic knowledge productions, which also was in arts and culture, of course. And just I want to say one sentence is about the victimhood. It is very easy, to see or tell that we having these victimhood narratives in our lived experiences. And actually this is not true, because just if you think about this previous sentence is what I said, that our memories and narratives are built on non-Romani perspectives, it also means that this victimhood, which means whatever victimhood in this sense, it's built by the Gajo perspectives, that they put us in the victimhood position. And then, because we learned in the system, in the educational system, them narratives, them vocabularies, them frameworks, we also put ourselves, our bodies, positions, whatever, in the victimhood position. And that's why we say that it's a victimhood position. It is not a victimhood position, clearly not. I think we should rethink and repair our memories. And then, because we don't have vocabularies, we don't have social concepts. All the social concepts, all the vocabularies in social sciences, it's owned by Gajo academic knowledge productions.
I completely agree that we kind of exist in already created the frame by the public narrative that we are victims, which is a part of true, but we don't want to continue this narrative. But at the same time, when was the first time for you that you heard about Roma resistance?
Well, for me, I didn't learn resistance in the classroom later on in life or anything like that. I learned it from my great-grandmother, who lost both of her parents in Treblinka concentration camp, and she refused, she refused to raise her children or grandchildren as victims. She, now me, already later in life, I'm actually understanding that this woman, she refused to raise us that way, but rather than she gave us the mentality of growing up as a survivors. And what I mean by that is that she told us that we carry something no regime could destroy, which is our language, our culture, and the philosophy that is embedded in our folklore. What I mean by that, it's this complete system of values, strategy, and dignity passed down without a single written page anywhere.
Usually, at least from my perspective, from my experience, when you start to talk to the people about the resistance, and they usually imagine people already armed, uprising, but resistance is the meaning of the resistance is much broader, right? It's to escape, it may be sabotage, it's to save the children, it's to, I don't know, like save the culture, keeping traditions alive. So that's also a part of resistance. And what the resistance itself means to you personally?
I've been thinking about it yesterday while writing my thoughts down about what resistance means, and it's two different topics, right? If we think about it in connection to the Roma Holocaust, and we think about it differently if we were to think about it in connection to our everyday lives. Because when I think about it in connection to today, for example, in connection to myself or to my community or to the people around me, I see the biggest manifestation of it is we do not operate by the values imposed on us by the society around us, because many times we accept our positions in the society because that is the picture that we were taught by the majority at some point.
And we believe in this picture.
And we believe in that because we have never learned where to take pride.
Yeah.
But what I see as resisting today is working on the basis of your own goals, aspirations, dreams, and working towards them without thinking of the limitations that were put on us, right? And that expresses in many different ways. For example, like the scholarship of Roma people that we go and we educate ourselves and others about the topics. It's of course a great part of the resistance, but also art, musicians, poets, dancers, whoever that goes and dares to speak up about what the reality is.
As an example of the resistance.
Yes.
Can you share more examples from the history and maybe from your own communities that consider as an act of the resistance? I know, Michel, that you have a grandfather who was a survivor from the concentration camp. Did he tell you anything about those stories?
Yes, he told my father the stories. The thing he told him was that there was a guard there, a SS guard, that was a Jew, that he wasn't a German guard. He was a Jew, and he said that he was German. He didn't tell the other German soldiers that he was German because they would kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy helped my grandfather survive there. When he needed information or something, he would tell my grandfather. He would help my grandfather to eat, to give him cigarettes. There was one story he told my father, my great-grandfather. He told my father that guard, he had a 10-pack of cigarettes, and he took always out 2 cigarettes to give to my great-grandfather. And with those cigarettes, he traded with the others to get bread or to trade with them for food or something to survive. And one day he told my great-grandfather that tomorrow is going to be a big room and everybody's going to get to eat soup. And they got no soup, nothing, there no food there, there were slaves there. And he said, be careful because tomorrow they're going to act as their kind and give them food. And the thing that was, he warned him about that. In that soup, they put rat poisoning. Mm-hmm. And he said to him, be careful, eat on the top and not all the way in the bottom because it's rat poisoning. And then when he told my great-grandfather that, my great-grandfather went to his family and told them about that. But they didn't want to listen to him because they were starving. They didn't have nothing to eat for so many weeks. So they ate the soup and they died.
One of the most well-known acts of the Roma resistance happened on May 16, 1944, in Auschwitz and Birkenau, when the SS soldiers came to liquidate the gypsy family camp, and prisoners armed themselves with whatever they found. It was improvised weapons, and they refused to leave the camp, the barrack, which gave them some time. But the soldiers withdrew, and and the liquidation was postponed later on. Do you have any other facts that you would add to this story, or maybe some important details of this fact? Because May 16 is important day for the Roma community, and I guess that unfortunately not all the Roma knows about these days, and it also connects to the question that even though they heard something about May 16, they doesn't know the story about the May 16.
Yeah, I guess I think it's the most famous story, well-known story of the May 16. In fact, it's powerful because it definitely destroys the stereotypes of Roma as passive victims. But I would say that if we only tell this story to make it seem exceptional, then it shows like we kind of the resistance stopped on that date, on the May 16. But that's not the case. Resistance was always constant till nowadays, and resistance is when we, the escapes, the sabotages, protecting children, trying to keep ourselves alive and the culture itself. I would say my great-grandmother, she didn't stand with the weapon in her hands, but she resisted every day into holding into that unwritten philosophy that we have of our people, which is the solidarity, the courage, and those were non-negotiable at all. And if I taught May 16 to students, I wouldn't end in a way to say, look at what they endured, but maybe I will go to the what would you risk to protect your community, to tell them, because resistance, we have to stop to look at the resistance as a memory, because it didn't stop there. That's the resistance when it comes to Roma. It's a skill and responsibility we inherit with every generation through our ancestors.
Yeah, I completely agree. But coming back to the May 16, why has this event become such a powerful symbol? And how do you feel, is there a danger in reducing Roma resistance just to this case?
I would reflect on this, but also just few seconds or sentences about the importance of the concept of resilience. I think also we have to talk about the concept of resilience and resistance, like what is resilience, what is resistance, and what are the similarities and differences.
Can you clarify that?
So basically, in my studies, I was focusing on the concept of resilience, and I understand the resilience is like, it is a flexible adaptation of different human abilities of individuals, or actually it can be also a system to resist and heal and recover and develop further in the face of a trauma and challenges and oppressions. It means that resilience is an inner ability, which is a human ability. When you are facing a trauma, it can be for example, in this case, Holocaust, or can be abuse, or can be murders, whatever. And then we as human, how we are coping with these different traumas. But for example, I'm going further, for example, racializing us or discrimination, anti-Gypsyism, it's also a kind of form of trauma. And that kind of different trauma, how can we cope as we Romani people, and how we can develop further from that kind of anti-Gypsyist frameworks, oppressions, and so on. And then the act itself, what we are doing, like we pushing ourselves 250% more as our Gajo fellows, that is the form of resistance, the action of it. If I may say also, if we're thinking about the different Romani intellectual generations, we can divide 3 different generations. The first and second generations, they were more kind of resistant in a sense that physically they were on the street, they were demonstrating, for example, the hunger strike of Romani Rose, or 1971 in the World Congress, right? So those are a very resistant moment. But resilience is different, because we as third generational, we are not really demonstrating on the street, and we are not really physically on the street, let's say, but we are, with our insight ability, we are resisting the system with our resilience, actually answering to the racial oppressions and anti-Gypsyism with our knowledge production. So that I just wanted to clarify for myself, and also give a kind of a hint of what I understand the difference of resistance and resilience.
Yeah.
One is not existing without each other. And the May 16, it's very interesting, because some social scientists, they, especially in Czech Republic, they arguing that May 16 never happened. They say that was a hallucinations of hunger of Romani people,
all together,
and or hunger and whatever, like the environment, whatever, and it's never actually happened. Or if something uprising happened, it wasn't maybe on May 16, it could be like May 22 or May 18 or May 11, whatever, but there is no historical and historical documentations of May 16. That is the social scientist argument. And that person who wrote a very famous book, I'm not telling the name and the book about the person now, but I was kind of asking him, like, let's say that May 16 never happened, as he's telling, that how can a Gajo can exploit and take away the pride of this Romani kind of rebuilding again the agency, like May 16 never happened? So do we have, as we Romani people, we have a right to kind of, it's happened or not happened, let's say, the right to establish this memorial days or not? This is also a question, you know. For me, it's, I think, more important, I mean, not more important, it's very important questions, like, these are these dates, are we able, or can we mark in the calendar this date without Gajo permission?
I like the fact that again, non-Roma people trying to tell our story.
Yeah, it is.
It's
I
like
mean,
continuous, ongoing process. But connecting to the May 16, and I would like to ask you, Michel, because you mentioned in your introduction that you are teaching in the school.
Yes.
So if you were designing a lesson about May 16 on high school students, how you would direct it to the way that we are not the victims, but portrayed it as an inspiration fact?
I would tell them that even in such desperation, that even in such dark place that you know you have no hope, you still try. You're brave. You're strong. You show that you do not give up even if you're outnumbered. You show them that you're not scared. That together you can come strong. And I would portray it as a bravery, that they didn't give up. That's what I would tell the kids about that.
To contribute to your point, I believe that to avoid this position of victims, a resistance is much easier to understand through the personal, individual stories. We just came back from the memorial site, and there was a wall with the portraits of the people who basically survivors, and they are showing the samples of the resistance.
When I was reading through the names, I stopped more at Celia Stoica, and I was thinking in connection to her about the value of art, right? As a way to to keep a memory alive, right? Because at many times, if we have like a historical testimonies and we have oral testimonies or written testimonies, it is a different kind of an expression, and it is at many times difficult to believe or to accept that such stuff happened, right? When you hear those insane stories. And I was thinking that through the art as she did it, we've been offered another dimension for us to understand the mental processes that were happening inside of Roma people's souls, Roma people's brains, right? Because in some way her art is exceptionally authentic, right? Like in some way her art, the stuff she draws, I find it simple but really expressive of the emotions of that time, and I find it like a really valuable capsule of the emotions, right? So I feel that can be taken as a convincing tool for people that have hard time dealing with the topic to be exposed to art regarding Roma Holocaust. And yeah, that's in some way I'd like to give respect to her for this one, because I feel like it's her art, like for the message that she conveys, it will be like eternally relevant. It will always be relevant for that.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point that to change this narrative through prideness, that may be the good way, because resistance didn't end in 1945.
Absolutely.
It's transformed, as we just talk, into civil society movement, different NGOs, organization, the youth leadership, etc., etc. But we already realized that the position of the victims, it doesn't work in the present. What is still effective as a strategy, and what should be changed? How do you think?
Well, I think there are two perspectives, which is one that you mentioned already.
As a victims, you mean?
Yeah. But I think that it's the other side of the coin. It's that, as you say, the Roma resistance didn't end up in 1945. Okay, it just stopped making the headlines. But today it lives in places where most of outside people never seen. And what I mean by that is, I'll give an example with the woman keeping schools accountable when their kids are pushed out in the Roma neighborhoods, where Roma neighbors are organizing after the police raids, in the young Roma documenting abuses when no journalist shows up. And it's in the quiet strategies for survival. Also, finding housing when the market is close to you, or keeping businesses alive under constant suspicion, holding on to a language that actually school systems try to erase. And I think that's the other side of the coin, when resistance transform, not only through the youth Roma that we're standing and we're organizing, and the advocacy we're trying to bring, or let's say the new way of advocacy we're trying to bring up, but also from that side of the coin, where our people is constantly, I will not say thriving, but still keep surviving in that way, and that's itself, it's a resistance. And the resilience that come as a mindset, them to keep resisting and to go to it. So the resistance they have, for me, it's a result of the resilience that they grow up, and it's kind of embedded already in the DNA. So yeah.
I mean, I wanted to connect my next question to the previous one, but still, I try to bring it. I find it important because only now I feel that in the school, teachers started to mention about the Roma Holocaust, because previously they even never mentioned that. Let's imagine, let's believe in the better world. Soon they started to talk about resilience, resistance from the Roma perspective. What kind of advice you would give to the teachers? From what point they should start? Because there is a danger that they will portray us again as a victims, even connecting to the word of resistance. So what's the advice you would give?
They will portray us as victims, so I don't know if we should give advice anyway. I mean, honestly, there is no solution for this. We cannot change all educational system. It is embedded. And when you speak about Romani people, you cannot just grasp or take out the racism, because when you speak about Roma, it's equal with racism and the victimhood which is created centuries of knowledge production. So they will not do that anyway. Sorry, I'm very pessimistic, but I think it's true. But I also just want to point out that for the previous question, little bit jumping back to the names and faces, and I just want to call all of our attentions that we are talking about our ancestors, about our grandparents, great-grandparents, and family members who were never ever spoke about that because of shame, because they did not really understood what's going on sometimes. And in a sense, I feel this is kind of our responsibility, social responsibility, to bring and honor their memories and dignities. Maybe we cannot bring back names, but just to recognize them as they were really the part of this events. And I think it would be super important to recognize them, our parents, great-parents, great-grandparents, and they are part of the history which actually were erased from the public memories. That's what I see. I think it would be very important, like going down to the meta levels and bring back them and honor them.
I think the teachers, I would give them a good advice. There's a book called from Jan Selling. It's called Frigörelse, and it talks about the Roma heroes. And for example, like you mentioned, the Trollman and Alfreda Nonsha Markowska, it talks a lot about what they did for the Roma people. And it's a lot I don't know the word for it, but it's a lot of history in that book that they could learn from.
You would suggest the good resources for learning. Fair enough.
Yeah. Maybe if I could give one piece of advice to any teacher, that it would be that Roma resistance as a, to teach Roma resistance as the story of people who acted, not only people who suffered. And to use figures like Alfreda Markowska alongside of the kind of family stories that we can find through archives or other articles if they searched. And to show that our folklore is our philosophy, a living moral framework that carried us through the Holocaust and still shapes our survival today. And most importantly, to make sure that they balance the truth about prosecution with the truth about agency, because dignity is as much a part of our history as suffering.
Maybe it's quite last question, but it includes double question for me. First is, what the resistance for you personally means today. And I guess that most of you would be agree that now this word resistance in our hands, and we still need to handle it. We still need to resist in a world where is so many discriminations. How we would resist at the present? What's your way of resistance? I would like each of you to share a couple of sentences.
I think most of us has to be on the streets in one or another way, and other have to work the underneath work, which is through policies. And for me personally, resistance means to carrying forward through all of that with dignity, culture, and that the courage that my family kept alive in the shadow of Holocaust, and the living philosophy of the unwritten wisdom that has guided us through persecution and survival for centuries. Which, you know, what I mean by that is every time you question your identity, or you feel like your Roma identity, it's a barrier, just remember it's an asset because of the way how your ancestors survived, how your language survived and is still spoken without being unwritten, and how we still, no matter which part of the world Roma are, I believe and I see it, that we have this amazing, no matter what, nurturing side, as this woman, Alfreda Markowska, had, and she saved so many children, Roma and Jewish, together without having any protection and risking her own life every day and being fully aware of this. And I believe that we Roma still kind of kept that strong feeling for not only self-preservation, but also for protecting the humanity itself, but rather than destroying or separating.
What's your personal way of resistance?
Well, professionally, I write a lot about the Roma injustice into articles, and not only articles, but I'm also here, loud, talking, showing up. And in so many ways, if I can be I don't want to be, you know, a role model. My personal philosophy is to show to younger Roma people from where I'm coming from. I don't want them to be like me, but to be with me, to bring anything that they have individually already, to say, like, go and take what you already have and make something out big and authentic out of it, because that's something that will move you forward to life. And this is how your kids and the future generation after you will kind of feel safer and protected.
All right. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you.
Brian, what's
Yes.
your way of resistance?
We must learn how to organize our thoughts so our expression has power. We must learn how to speak, how to write, how to think in such way that we are not going to be falling victims to the people that are trying to tyrannize us just because they are capable of expressing themselves better than us, and we shall suffer from that. We must really be careful about it, and I feel like that's really important. And in addition to that I feel like is part of my own way of resisting, and it's something that was given to me by my family, is the emphasis on education and authenticity. Because education, right, is whatever we study is mainly that we learn how to think in whatever domains that interest us. And to think authentically and be brave to speak about it, I feel is a great way of resistance on a personal and even a communal level.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. Michel.
I'm gonna take an example of my great-grandfather Miloš Karoli. Example that I'm gonna take of him is that he didn't give up. It's bravery, not giving up, and fighting for what's yours, fighting for what you are, and not letting people push you down, and always moving forward. Even though he was in the concentration camp and it was a very bad state there, he didn't give up, and he knew that he was gonna get out. He had a mindset that he's not gonna lose to them and he's gonna fight. So, because that's how my grandfather was and how strong he was, and his mindset that to be brave and strong, that's why today it means a lot to me. Because if he didn't fight and if he wasn't strong, I wouldn't be here today talking about him, and that's why it means a lot to me. So that's why I'm not never gonna give up and keep on fighting for my culture and my identity.
Have you ever recorded any stories that he maybe passed to your father?
Yes, we have it in the archive in Norway. We have the recordings of him in the interviews where he talks what he went through in the Holocaust in Buchenwald. He talks how he survived and what he did to survive.
Cool. Thank you for doing this. Dezső.
I shouldn't be the closing words because really it's so beautiful what you said. Honestly, it's just crazy. It's amazing. Yeah. So, but my resistance or takeaway resistance or understanding of resistance is like reparation of Romani memories and agencies. This is because as you mentioned, Brian, like we are capable and we are able to do this with knowledge production, and also you mentioned memories, like family memories. It's very important because without those, these memories and histories will just disappear. And we as Romani intellectuals, I'm sorry to say that, but we are intellectuals and Romani, we are kind of responsible for this to pass to the future generations. And yeah, we have the power for that, and that is our resistance.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing your thoughts, your knowledge, your voices. Roma resistance is not just a history; it's a legacy that continues to shape our present and our future. And if this conversation you find meaningful, please subscribe, share, and join us for the next episodes of the podcast Echoes of Memory.